scripture reading this morning comes from the book of Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12, beautiful verses 1 through 3. And Paul writes to the church in Rome, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, what is acceptable, what is perfect. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has given to you. God add his blessing to the reading of this word. Paul wrote some beautiful words there, but I'll tell you, there's nothing like, even with these great words of the Apostle Paul that can be so memorable, there's nothing more memorable than the great stories in the Bible. And I'm always very interested, especially in the stories that people know from the Bible who never go to church. There's lots of people who don't go to church, who aren't believers, but yet there's still certain stories in the Bible that everyone seems to at least be vaguely acquainted with. There's the story of David and Goliath, of course, the story of Noah and the flood, the story of Jonah and the whale. All of these very popular. And two that I think most people know, maybe not quite as big as those three, but still very important, is the story that I talked to the children about today, the story of Daniel and the lion's den. It is a very important story. And it's important for us today because it goes a long way in telling us and giving us helpful information in how we as people of faith are called to live our lives. And the story of Daniel and the lion's den reminds us of the beautiful words of Paul that I just read in the book, his letter to the Romans. Daniel is an amazing story. Because Daniel was, despite the fact he was a young man, he seemed to be so wise, so close to God. You see, he knew, Daniel did, the importance of two words. Two words, and how important they can be in developing and growing closer to God, and also that these two words really went a long way in the way we use them to determine the content and the quality of our lives and our character. The two words that Daniel knew how to use, and used so well, were yes and no. Daniel knew when to say no to certain things. And as he said no to these things in his life, he grew closer to God. As he cut things out of his life, other things, good things, began to grow. And Daniel also knew what to say yes to in his life. Saying yes to things that were important, that helped him to grow closer to God. Through these yeses and these nos, he created this life where he was drawing closer and feeling closer to God each and every day. And his life was being created by all of these yeses and these nos rightly used. And here we are today as people of God who, like Daniel, we want to feel God's Spirit within us. We want to feel like we are growing closer and closer to God each and every day. And we can do it like him, through yeses and nos, all rightly used. Well, let's talk first about who Daniel was. Daniel lived 600 years before Jesus. And in his life, he had a difficult life in some ways. He was privileged, he was well educated, but his country had been invaded by the Babylonians when he was young, and he was taken captive, along with a bunch of other young people, to go back to Babylon. This was an interesting strategy the Babylonians would use. They would take the young people, the privileged young people, out of the country, and they would take them to Babylon, and they would kind of continue their education there. And they would try to make it so that they became more Babylonian than they were anything else. And then they could return them to their home country, and they would teach everyone else about what it means to be a part of the Babylonian Empire. It was a way sort of to spread the word. And here, Daniel found himself captive in Babylon. And he had to know and try to resist this desire of his captors that he would become more like them than like God's people. And that's really his story. The story and the story of Israel, how they survived this captivity, how they made sure that even in that time in Babylon, they didn't lose who they were. It's actually one of the great underreported miracles of the Bible. Through this long captivity, these people kept true to themselves. And the story of Daniel is that story. It is the point of this part of the book of Daniel is discipline. Is how can we exercise our discipline, particularly in difficult times, to say yes to certain things and no to other things. And in that way, become the people God wants us to be. Draw closer and closer to God each day. Make sure that God's kingdom is more and more apparent in our lives, and in our homes, and in our church, and in our world. It's a great story. So let's take a look at it today. How did Daniel do it? Well, first of all, of course, he said no. As I mentioned before. That is the first thing that he did. As he felt God's Spirit within him, certain things he would say no to. And when he said no at the right time, it was a bit like a chisel in his life. He was able to cut away things that he knew and he believed that God didn't want there in his life. It was like a sculptor making a great sculpture out of marble. And you know, that old thing that we hear that Leonardo da Vinci would say, or Michelangelo actually would say about the great sculptures he created. He said, you know, if I'm doing a sculpture of an angel, I look at the big stone there, I imagine what the angel looks like, I see it there in my mind, and then I simply cut away everything that isn't an angel. That was Daniel's strategy in his life. He used these no's in his life like a chisel to cut away everything that he believed God did not want there. And he starts with some very simple things. He starts with things that you might think, well, this doesn't really matter. This is something I can give in on, and that's the issue of food. Of course, his people had very strict rules about what food could and couldn't be eaten. And there they were in Babylon, all these young people wearing the Babylonian clothes and being served these delicious, rich meals containing, who knew what was in a lot of this stuff that they were eating. And Daniel decided that he would say no to that rich food. And he and many of his friends would only eat together, they would only eat simple foods, grains and vegetables. And that was part of his strategy. Saying no to something that he believed God didn't want him to do. And in that way, staying true to himself. Staying close to God. It's this idea, again, of chipping away, of determining in our lives what it is God wants and what God doesn't want, and simply chipping away by saying no, using that tool to draw closer to God. To become more the people that God would want us to be. There's a great lesson from this in nature. And a lot of the avid gardeners here are maybe thinking about this right now. Pruning, cutting back. That's something that gardeners must do. It's something we do with our shrubs and with our trees. And I read something interesting this summer that's saying that expert gardener saying, during the summer, you trim back the things that are growing out of hand, the things that you want to make sure they kind of stay down and you don't want them there. But in the winter, that is when you prune back in the places you want to grow. So if there's some blank space in your plant, that's where you trim it right there. That's where you prune, because pruning back causes things to grow. And that's the idea for us today, too. As we prune back these things in our lives, as we say no to certain things, other things will grow there. It's not that those places will stay blank, will stay empty, but it's going to allow room, allow space for good things to grow. But of course, you can't do this unless you have a picture in your mind of what you want to look like, what you want your life to look like? It's like pruning a tree. You kind of have to have that picture. What do you want that tree to look like in the springtime? What do you want it to look like a year from now? And then to prune in those places where you want it to grow. And so we have to have that picture of ourselves as well. What does God want our lives to look like? What is there that shouldn't be? And we all could have our own list, and it probably would hurt any of us here to come up with a list of things that we could cut out of our lives. Maybe, perhaps, it could be the way we speak of other people when they are not present. And we don't always speak charitably about people when they are not around. And maybe that's something we could prune out of our lives and see what wonderful thing would grow there in its place. Maybe it's simply a list of bad habits that we have, things we know we shouldn't do. And there is some habit that we could intentionally prune back and then see what good thing grows there in its place. Maybe it's the way we spend some or all of our leisure time. Our leisure activity, we can do anything we want, and how do we spend that time? And maybe there is something there in the middle of the things we choose to do that we could prune back, say no to, and as a result feel closer to God. A firm no. A firm no, well used, does this pruning. And it is remarkable to see what can grow as a result. Daniel felt God's Spirit in his life. As a result, he knew what to say no to. He felt that, and then he had the courage and the discipline to say that simple word. No. No, this isn't for me. This isn't something I want to do. But one thing we have to realize is it wasn't saying no that got Daniel in the lion's den. It was saying yes. It was saying yes specifically to worship and to prayer. You see, the king didn't want other people being worshipped other than himself. Right? The emperor was the one who got worshipped. And so Daniel's enemies convinced the king to make this law. Only the king could be worshipped. If anyone else was worshipped, this terrible penalty, being torn apart by lions if you worship God. And Daniel wasn't about to give in on this dumb law. Yeah, there were the police, there was the military ready to enforce this law. There was the king saying this is the law of the land. But Daniel knew it was wrong. It was wrong for him and it was wrong for his people. They must worship God. That was a part of who they were. And so Daniel continued every day, 3 times a day, praying to God until finally his enemies caught him and brought it to the king. The king, of course, laid down the sentence of being thrown in the lion's den. It's all there in chapter 6 of Daniel. And of course, we read of the great miracle that occurs. The story ends up happily. Daniel, through a great miracle, is not eaten by the lions. He is set free. The law is changed back so everyone can worship God. And this story tells the importance of having this kind of courage. It tells, too, the importance of saying yes to what we should say yes to, no matter what others think. What we think, what we know God wants us to do. That is how we build up a life. We don't just chip away at the things that shouldn't be there. We build up. We create something. We add to our lives by saying yes to certain things. Yeah, Michelangelo's approach to cutting away, that was a good approach for marble. But there's another way to sculpt too, and that is by taking some soft material like clay and adding to a sculpture. Creating what you want to create there. Creating something good, something beautiful. Saying yes to the right things. And we can do that in our lives. Yes, we can create lives by cutting away, but we can create them by building up too. What are we going to say yes to in our lives? And in order to know, we still have to have that picture. What does God want us to do? What is God calling us to? What is not in our lives right now that should be in our lives? and to say yes to those things, to build something beautiful and attractive in our lives by creating the lives they should be. It's a slow process. That's one thing about building up. If you're doing a sculpture, let's say you're doing a bust of somebody, you don't take a big thing of clay and slam it on there and add to it. You just take a little bit of clay, you add it little by little, and that's what it is for us in saying yes to things. It's a step-by-step process. They say that the philosopher Socrates was once asked, how do you get to Mount Olympus? And his answer was, just make sure that every step you take goes in that direction. It's very simple. It's frustratingly simple advice. Just make sure that every step that you take goes in that direction. So how am I going to get through this next semester in school successfully? Well, just make sure that every step you take this semester heads you to a successful conclusion this semester. How do I become a better friend to those in my life? A better wife, a better husband, a better mother, a better father, a better son, a better daughter. How do I do that? Well, just make sure that every step you take leads you in that direction. Well, how do I get rid of these habits in my life, these things I know I shouldn't do? Well, just make sure that every step you take leads you in that direction. This was Daniel's genius, his wisdom, even at such a young age, is that we get to where we're going by small steps. By lots and lots and lots of yeses and no's said at the right time, and that is what creates the journey of our lives. That's what gets us to the destination where God wants us to be. Daniel was disciplined because of this ability to say yes and say no at the right time. But one more quick point, and it is a warning. Even today, saying yes, and the yeses that God wants you to say yes to, and saying no to the things that God doesn't want you to do, can land you today in the lion's den. Yeah, it can get you in trouble when you decide that God is calling you to go against what everyone else is thinking, what everyone else is doing. And so, in our life, we decided, unlike the world, we are going to turn our backs on the importance of materialism. You know, if we are going to say no to consumerism in our lives in favor of something else, watch out. There are going to be plenty of people around you that will be ready to throw you in the lion's den because of that. It's true too. You know, in this world, we see so much, we feel so much, we know what's going on there in our world. And so, if we in our world decide that God is calling us to say no to the persistent anger that we feel every day coming toward us and surrounding us, and if we decide that we're going to say no and we are not going to live angry lives like so many around us, then we need to be ready to be punished for that, to be thrown into the lion's den. If we are going to say no, as we should, to hatred, if we are going to say no to intolerance, then we need to be ready for others to throw us into the lion's den. If we choose to say yes to compassion, to patience, to love, all of these can get us in trouble in this day and age. And you know, it's strange, but even when we say yes to the teachings of Christ, the teachings of Christ that are undeniable, that every person, no matter their social status, no matter their color, no matter their age, no matter their mental health, every person is a person of worth. And every person is welcomed in God's kingdom. Even making that plain in this day and age can get you thrown into the lion's den. Then the final question for us is, do we have the courage? The courage to step into this kind of lion's den. The courage to put ourselves at odds with the beliefs of so many folks who are around us. Well, I pray today that you have both the faith and the Spirit working in your life that will give you and grant you the courage to say some difficult no's and yeses in a way that helps you always to answer hatred with love, to answer judgment with compassion, and to know each and every day that these yeses and these no's will help you to grow closer to God and closer to God's kingdom. Let us bow and pray. Dear Lord, it is courage we need and courage we ask for. Help us to have the strength to say no to all that takes us further from you. And help us to have a determination to say yes to acts of kindness and community that bring glory to your name. It is in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.